Have you ever been in a conversation where every word you said seemed wrong, as if the simple act of opening your mouth was an invitation for sarcastic corrections or looks of disdain? This is the silent game of the intellectual narcissist. They don't need to shout, curse, or make scenes to invalidate you. Their weapons are much more subtle and sharp. Knowledge used as a shield and often as a weapon. If you've ever encountered someone like this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. These individuals dominate spaces with complicated words, obscure references, and an arrogant tone that makes you question your own intelligence. Even worse, they turn any interaction into a one-sided competition where there's only one winner, themselves. I know this because I've had more than my share of experiences with people like this. Today, we're going to dive into this fascinating yet exhausting behavior. We'll explore who the intellectual narcissist is, how they operate, and most importantly, how to identify their tactics before they erode your confidence. This video might be exactly what you need to understand why some interactions are so draining, and how to deal with them in the best way possible. Let's start by understanding what an intellectual narcissist is. The intellectual narcissist, also known as the cerebral type, is someone who finds validation and narcissistic supply through their intelligence, knowledge, or academic achievements. This kind of person not only values their intellect, but also uses it as a tool to dominate conversations and devalue others. If you've ever met someone who seems to turn every interaction into a one-sided competition, where they are the only winner, you are probably dealing with this profile. These individuals have a special talent for using technical vocabulary, obscure references, or complex concepts that leave others feeling inadequate. They don't do this by accident. It's a deliberate strategy to place themselves at the center of attention and ensure everyone around notices just how superior they are. In many cases, their interventions are so elaborate that no one can keep up. But that doesn't matter. The goal is to intimidate, not to educate. I've attended scientific conferences where I've seen this behavior in action. Some of the biggest names in the field, true geniuses, were able to change the mood of an entire room with their arrogance. I remember one occasion when a young student asked a sincere question, seeking to learn. The response she received was filled with contempt, packed with technical terms that even the experts in the audience didn't fully understand. That scene perfectly illustrates how the intellectual narcissist operates, belittling others to stay on top. Even outside academic settings, these behaviors manifest. It could be during a trivial discussion about wine, where the narcissist cites rare labels with a tone of superiority, or in a conversation about books, where they mention obscure authors just to impress or intimidate. Regardless of the context, the result is always the same: a feeling of exclusion and inferiority for those around them. This pattern reveals something deeper, a constant need for validation. Behind all this flaunting of knowledge, there is often latent insecurity. But how does this insecurity translate into such striking behaviors? This leads us to explore better how to identify these people and understand their impacts. Identifying an intellectual narcissist can be challenging, especially since their tactics are subtle and often masked as mere superior knowledge. However, there are clear signs that can help recognize this behavior before it causes deeper emotional harm. One of the main indicators is the tendency to correct others unnecessarily or excessively. Imagine being in a meeting where someone repeatedly points out minor errors, like the pronunciation of a word or the use of an allegedly incorrect technical term. These interventions are not meant to clarify, but rather to highlight the supposed superiority of the speaker. Another telling sign is the use of jargon or obscure references that few people understand. I recall an instance at an academic event where a speaker mentioned theories so complex that even the experts in the audience couldn't fully follow. Instead of promoting learning, the approach generated discomfort and silence. This kind of attitude creates a barrier between the narcissist and others, making it clear that their intention is to intimidate, not to connect. Moreover, these individuals often belittle choices considered common. It could be something as simple as criticizing a wine for not being refined, or mocking someone for staying at a popular chain hotel during their vacation. These comments, though they may seem harmless at first glance, are forms of invalidation that erode self-esteem over time. For those who live with an intellectual narcissist, the emotional impact can be devastating. The constant feeling of inadequacy and frustration is a heavy burden to carry. A classic example is when they address partners or coworkers in a condescending tone, as if speaking to children incapable of understanding complex concepts. This dynamic becomes even more painful when it occurs within family relationships. Imagine a child whose father or mother always treats them as inferior, minimizing their achievements or ridiculing their academic mistakes. This creates deep scars that can last a lifetime. When observing these behaviors, it becomes evident that the intellectual narcissist isn't just seeking validation. They are trying to maintain a status of superiority at all costs. And this desperate need reveals something important about their psychology. Behind this armor of knowledge, there is often latent fragility. But do all intellectual narcissists share the same characteristics? In reality, there are nuances in this behavior that deserve closer analysis. Intellectual narcissism does not manifest in the same way in everyone. There are important nuances that differentiate profiles, especially when we talk about the grandiose and vulnerable subtypes. The grandiose intellectual narcissist is the one who flaunts their knowledge without hesitation. They dominate conversations with an almost palpable air of superiority, often interrupting others to correct minor details or make sarcastic comments. This type loves being the center of attention and uses their intelligence as a tool to intimidate. Imagine someone at a work meeting who, at the slightest sign of error, raises their voice to highlight technical flaws or cites theories so complex that no one else can follow. This attitude not only devalues colleagues but also prevents any genuine collaboration. On the other hand, there is the vulnerable intellectual narcissist, who may seem more discreet at first glance. However, they also seek validation through knowledge, though in a more indirect way. This profile often displays latent insecurity, compensating for it through passive-aggressive criticism or minimizing others' accomplishments. A classic example is someone mocking another person for not having read an obscure book or visited a little-known museum. Although less explicit, this behavior still generates discomfort and invalidation because it is rooted in the need to feel superior. These two types share something in common. Both use knowledge as a weapon, even if their approaches differ. While the grandiose projects open arrogance, the vulnerable acts more subtly, often masking their insecurity with false humility. At scientific conferences, for instance, I've witnessed both profiles in action. The grandiose monopolized discussions with unnecessary technical terms, while the vulnerable made disparaging comments about other participants' academic titles. The dynamic between these subtypes reveals something crucial. Their behavior is driven by internal fragilities, whether out of insecurity or sheer arrogance. Both are trapped in a cycle of relentless pursuit of validation. But understanding these differences is only the first step. The question that naturally arises is, how do you deal with these profiles when they cross your path? Dealing with an intellectual narcissist may seem like a draining task, but there are practical strategies that can help minimize the emotional impact and keep your energy intact. The most effective approach is disengagement. Simply stepping out of the conversation or avoiding unnecessary intellectual competitions is often the best choice. When you try to win a discussion with this type of person, you end up validating their behavior. After all, they love turning every interaction into a contest to prove their superiority. Imagine you're in a work meeting and the narcissist starts correcting something irrelevant or citing technical terms no one understands. Instead of trying to keep up or counter-argue, use a polite excuse. I need to review these numbers before we continue. Or, I'll think more about this and come back to the topic. This kind of response offers a graceful exit without feeding the other person's ego. Another important strategy is avoiding fueling their need for validation. Intellectual narcissists thrive when they feel they are impressing others. If you show indifference or keep the interaction objective, they lose some of their power. For example, if someone starts talking about a rare wine that only a few can appreciate, don't fall into the trap of trying to impress them with your own knowledge. Respond neutrally. Interesting. Seems like something unique. And change the subject. In environments where it's impossible to completely avoid contact, such as at work or within the family, setting clear boundaries is crucial. This means calmly stating that certain comments are inappropriate or that specific behaviors are bothersome. For example, if a colleague constantly corrects your pronunciation in an arrogant manner, you can respond, I understand there are different ways to say this, but I'd rather focus on the content of our discussion. Something I've learned over the years is that elegance lies in not playing their game. Even though it may be tempting to prove that you know as much as they do, remember, by doing so, you're placing yourself on their level. True power lies in recognizing that it's not worth spending energy on these dynamics. People who are truly secure in their knowledge don't feel the need to dominate conversations or invalidate others. Now that we know how to identify and deal with these profiles, it becomes clear that their behavior reveals much more about their insecurities than their intellectual abilities. But how can we apply these strategies in everyday life? And more importantly, how can we protect our self-esteem in these situations? These reflections lead us to the conclusion of this fascinating topic. Understanding the behavior of the intellectual narcissist goes beyond just identifying their tactics. It's about recognizing how they impact our lives and learning to handle them effectively. As we've seen, these individuals use their knowledge to dominate conversations, devalue others, and seek constant validation. However, behind this armor of superiority often lies deep insecurity that drives them to act this way. Dealing with an intellectual narcissist isn't easy, but it also doesn't have to be exhausting. Disengagement, neutrality, and setting clear boundaries are powerful tools to protect your energy and self-esteem. Remember, being intelligent isn't a crime, but using knowledge as a weapon reveals fragility, not strength. People who are truly confident in their intellect don't feel the need to humiliate or intimidate others. They understand that true value lies in fostering genuine connections and sharing knowledge in an accessible way. If you've had experiences with intellectual narcissists, share them in the comments. Your stories can help others feel less alone on this journey. If this video made sense to you, the next one will delve even deeper into the subject. Don't miss it.